envelope sat in my glove compartment for 11 days before I opened it. My grandmother had pressed it into my hands at my cousin's graduation party, the same party where my stepfather stood at the buffet table telling his golf buddies about the investment portfolio he'd been building for years. I remember the way she curled my fingers around it, both her hands over mine, dry and warm like parchment, and whispered, "Don't open this until you're alone." Then my aunt called her name from across the yard and she shuffled away, and that was the last real conversation we ever had. She passed 6 weeks later. Congestive heart failure, the doctor said. Peaceful, they said. She was 81. I didn't open the envelope because I was grieving. Then I didn't open it because I was afraid of what was inside. Grief and fear look almost identical from the inside. Both of them make you very still. Her name was Eleanor. Everyone called her Gram. My name is Faye. I'm 32 years old. I work as a radiologic technologist at a hospital in suburban Ohio. And until 14 months ago, I believed that my grandmother had died, leaving very little behind. A house that needed work, some costume jewelry. A savings account was maybe $8,000 or $9,000 that my stepfather, whose name is Gerald, I will call him Gerald because that is his name and he has earned nothing softer, had already quietly mentioned he would handle the paperwork for. He had been handling paperwork for our family since I was 9 years old. My mother married him when I was 9. My father had left 2 years before that. Not dramatically, not violently, just incrementally, the way water finds the lowest point. He moved to Portland, remarried, had a daughter named something I always forget, and sent birthday cards that arrived 3 to 5 days late every single year without exception. I stopped expecting them to be on time around age 14. I stopped expecting them at all around 20. So Gerald filled that space. He was good at filling spaces. He was the kind of man who always knew where the notary was, who had a guy for everything, who kept a fireproof safe in the master bedroom closet and referenced it often enough that you understood it was there, that it contained things, that those things were being taken care of by him. My mother found this deeply reassuring. She had spent 2 years drowning after my father left. Gerald was solid ground. For a long time, I was grateful for him too. But gratitude has a way of expiring when you start paying attention. The first thing I noticed was small. I was 19, home for my first semester of college, and I overheard Gerald on the phone in his office. The door was cracked. I wasn't trying to listen, saying, "The account in Eleanor's name. Yes, we'll want to restructure that before the end of the quarter." I didn't know what it meant. I filed it away the way you file things when you're 19 and don't yet understand that some things need to be acted on immediately or they calcify into the walls of your life. The second thing I noticed was bigger. I was 26. Graham had asked me to drive her to a meeting with her estate attorney, a man named Mr. Holloway whose office smelled like old carpet and printer toner. She asked me to wait in the car. I waited 40 minutes. When she came out, she looked pale and tight-lipped. And on the drive home, she said, almost to herself, "I need to fix something." I thought it was already fixed. I asked her what she meant. She patted my knee and said, "I'll take care of it, sweetheart. I just want to make sure it goes to you." I thought she meant the costume jewelry. I was so wrong about so many things. The envelope contained a letter, handwritten on her pale blue stationery, and a business card for a law office I didn't recognize. Whitfield and Associates, Columbus, Ohio, with a woman's name written on the back in Graham's looping cursive. "Ask for Diane. Tell her Eleanor sent you. She knows." The letter was 3 pages long. I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage and read it twice. I'll give you the short version first and the long version after, because that's how I had to process it too. Short version: my grandmother had opened a uniform transfer to Minors Act account for me in 1998, when I was 8 years old, the year before my father left and 2 years before Gerald arrived. She had been quietly adding to it for years. Birthday money, Christmas money, proceeds from selling the house she and my grandfather had owned in West Virginia when he passed. She had also, in 2009, transferred the majority of a small annuity she'd inherited from her own mother into a separate account in my name, held at a regional bank in Columbus. Total value at the time she wrote the letter. She wrote it 18 months before she died. I checked the date 3 times, was somewhere in the range of $480,000. Long version, Gerald knew about it. He had known for years. And sometime between my overhearing that phone call at 19 and Graham's pale-faced exit from the attorney's office at 26, he had gotten her to sign documents that rerouted the account's designated beneficiary. To him. Not to me, to him. Graham had figured it out. That was what the Mr. Holloway meeting had been. She'd gone back and tried to correct it, and she had, partially. Enough that there was still a legal trail. Enough that Diane at Whitfield and Associates, who turned out to be an estate litigation attorney with a very calm voice and a very direct manner, told me on the phone that we had grounds. Your grandmother was thorough, Diane said. She made copies of everything. She gave them to us for safekeeping 3 years ago. I sat with that for a moment. 3 years ago. She had known for 3 years that something was wrong, and she had been quietly, methodically building a paper trail. And she had never said a word to me. She had just slipped an envelope into my hands at a graduation party and trusted me to find my way. That's who she was. She didn't cause scenes, she built cases. I come from her, I think. I just didn't know it yet. I want to be honest about what the next 4 months looked like because I think it's important to say that this was not a movie. There was no single dramatic moment where everything clicked into place. There was a lot of scanning documents at the FedEx office on Route 40. There was a lot of sitting in Diane's waiting room reading the same 3-month-old magazines. There was a lot of driving the 45 minutes to Columbus after my shifts ended at 7 in the evening, still in my scrubs, eating gas station coffee and trying not to cry in the car. I did not tell my mother. This was the hardest decision I made in the whole process, and I've thought about it many times since. My mother is not a bad person. I want to say that clearly. She is someone who needed to be held up. And Gerald held her up, and she built her entire sense of safety around that. Telling her what I suspected, what I was learning, bit by bit, was not a suspicion but a fact, would have required her to dismantle the thing that had kept her standing for 20 years. I wasn't ready to do that to her. I wasn't sure she was ready either. So I kept quiet. I went to work. I scanned documents. Gerald, during this time, was preparing for his firm's annual client appreciation dinner. He hosted it every year at a hotel event space in downtown Columbus. The kind of beige-carpeted ballroom that exists specifically for events where people mill around with glasses of wine pretending to be more interested in each other than they are. He'd been doing it for 12 years. About 200 people typically attended, clients, colleagues, some family. My mother always helped him organize it. It was, she said, the thing he was most proud of every year. This year he had added something new to the program. He was going to make an announcement. My mother told me about it 3 weeks before the event, over the phone, in a tone I can only describe as rehearsed. She said Gerald wanted to share some exciting financial news at the dinner. He had been managing a family asset for several years and the returns had been remarkable, and he wanted to celebrate that publicly. I understood immediately what he was going to announce. He was going to stand in front of 200 people and take credit for growing an account that my grandmother had built for me over 30 years. He was going to frame it as his own financial acumen. He was going to use my grandmother's careful, quiet love as a prop for his reputation. I said, "That's wonderful, Mom, I'll be there. I need to tell you about one conversation I had before that dinner, because it matters." About 10 days out, I ran into Gerald at my mother's house. I had come to drop off some of her mail. She still used my address for certain things, a leftover habit from when I'd helped her set up online billing years ago. He was in the kitchen. We talked for maybe 8 minutes. It was entirely normal. He asked about my job. I asked about his. He mentioned the dinner. "You should come," he said. "It'll be a nice evening." "I wouldn't miss it," I said. He smiled. He had no idea. And I know this because I watched his face carefully, the way I'd learned to watch things carefully in the months since I'd opened that envelope, and there was nothing there. No flicker. No hesitation. He was completely comfortable. That told me everything I needed to know about how certain he was that he had won. Diane had been in contact with the county prosecutor's office for 6 weeks by the time the dinner arrived. I want to be careful here, because I know some people will say I should have skipped the dinner entirely and let the legal process handle it quietly. I've heard that argument, I understand it. But I need you to understand something. Gerald had stood in my grandmother's house at her funeral reception, accepted condolences, and told her friends and her neighbors what a remarkable woman she had been. He had said, "She was like a mother to me." He had said it with his hand on my mother's back and his face arranged into something that looked exactly like grief. There is a particular kind of person who can do that, who can do what he did to her accounts and then stand at her funeral and perform sorrow. I am not interested in protecting that person from public embarrassment. The dinner was on a Thursday in October. I drove down after my shift. I had changed into a dark green dress in the hospital bathroom and done my makeup in the rearview mirror in the parking garage. I looked fine. I felt like I was made of wire. My mother found me near the entrance and hugged me and said I looked beautiful, and I held on to her a few seconds longer than usual because I knew that in about 90 minutes her life was going to become very complicated and I loved her and I was sorry. The room filled up. Gerald worked it the way he always worked rooms. Handshakes, first names, that particular laugh that was loud enough to be heard but shaped to sound spontaneous. My mother stood near the bar looking proud of him. I stood near the back and talked to people I barely knew and drank water and waited. At 8:15, he took the microphone. He thanked everyone for coming. He talked about his firm's growth. He talked about the market, about patience, about the value of long-term vision. He was very good at this. He was polished and warm, and the room was with him entirely. Then he said, "I want to share something personal tonight." He talked about a family account that had been in his stewardship for several years. He talked about navigating it through 2 market corrections. He talked about the current balance. He said the number out loud, casually, the way you mention a sports score, and there was an audible intake of breath in the room and then impressed, approving applause. He smiled at my mother. She pressed her hand to her heart. I walked to the front of the room. I don't think he saw me until I was about 15 feet away. I saw the moment he registered me, just a fractional pause in his expression, there and gone. And then he recovered and smiled and said into the microphone, "And here's my stepdaughter." "That account belongs to me," I said. I was not loud. I want to be clear about that. I was not shaking, I was not yelling, I was not making a scene in the way that word implies disorder. I was calm. I was so calm it surprised even me. I had been afraid of this moment for 4 months, and when it arrived I felt perfectly still. "That account was opened by my grandmother in 1998 in my name," I said. "The documentation is with Whitfield & Associates in Columbus. The county prosecutor's office has been in contact with them since August." The room was very quiet. Gerald's face did something I don't have a precise word for. It collapsed, but not all at once. It went through several stages, like a controlled demolition, each layer giving way separately. First the smile, then the color, then the arrangement of his features into something that looked like a prepared response. He said, "Faye, this isn't the place." "You made it the place," I said. "You put it on the program." My mother made a sound behind me. I didn't turn around, I couldn't. I put an envelope on the table beside the podium. It contained a summary letter from Diane, 2 pages, outlining the core findings. I had made 12 copies and placed them at 12 different tables earlier in the evening, while Gerald was working the room. Then I walked out. I sat in my car in the parking garage for a long time. My phone lit up 14 times in 20 minutes. 11 were from numbers I recognized. 3 I didn't. I answered one. It was Diane. She said very calmly, "How did it go?" I said, "I think I just blew up my family." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You didn't blow it up. You found out it had a crack in the foundation. That's different." I've thought about that a lot since. Here's what happened in the weeks that followed, because I know people want to know and I think it deserves to be said plainly, rather than wrapped in drama. Gerald was formally charged 6 weeks after the dinner. Exploitation of a vulnerable adult, my grandmother. Financial fraud. Improper beneficiary designation obtained through undue influence. His attorney tried to argue that the documents were signed voluntarily and competently, but Graham had been thorough. She had dated everything. She had left notes in her own handwriting with her attorney. She had, at some point, apparently described Gerald's behavior to Mr. Colt Holloway in enough detail that it was documented. She had built a wall around the truth and trusted that someone would eventually come find it. The account, all of it, plus interest, plus a civil damages settlement I am not allowed to specify, was returned to me. I am not going to tell you the number on the air, but it changed things. It changed a lot of things. Gerald pled out. He did not go to trial. He lost his financial advisor license and received a suspended sentence contingent on restitution. I know some people will think that's too light. Some days I do too. But I watched the hearing and I watched his face when the judge read the terms, and whatever I was looking for, I found it. My mother. I need to tell you about my mother. She called me 4 days after the dinner, once the initial shock had moved through her system and settled into something she could speak around. The conversation lasted almost 2 hours. I cried for most of it. She cried for all of it. She said, I didn't know. I believe her. I have to believe her. And not just because she's my mother. I believe her because I watched her face at that dinner when I spoke. And what I saw was not guilt. It was devastation. It was the look of someone whose foundation just gave way. She is in therapy now. We are in a better place than we were a year ago, though better is relative and some weeks it doesn't feel like very much. We are working on it. I think we will keep working on it. She loved a man who turned out to be a particular kind of hollow, and she is grieving that. And I am trying to be patient with her grief the way she was patient with mine when I was 9 and my father drove away. My grandmother's ring, a small sapphire on a thin gold band, nothing expensive, sits on my right hand now. I got it out of the estate after probate cleared. It fits perfectly. I don't think that's an accident. I think she knew it would. I get asked sometimes whether I regret how I handled it, whether I should have done it privately, legally, quietly, without the 200 people in the banquet room and the prepared envelopes on the tables. Here's what I say. My grandmother did not make a scene. My grandmother was quiet and methodical, and she built her case in private, and she trusted the process. She was completely right to do that. The legal foundation she laid is the reason the charges held. I am not minimizing that. But she also spent the last 3 years of her life knowing what had been done to her. She sat with that knowledge. She carried it. She smiled at Gerald at Thanksgiving dinner. She accepted his help with her grocery bags. She watched him stand at her kitchen counter eating her food with the comfortable ease of someone who has already taken what he came for. She deserved better than that. She deserved to see his face when the floor dropped out from under him. I couldn't give her that. But I could go to the dinner. So I did. There's a kind of peace that comes not from forgetting but from finishing. From standing in the place where the wrong thing happened and saying out loud what it was. From refusing to let someone take the last word. Graham gave me that. She wrapped it in pale blue stationery and pressed it into my hands and trusted me to know what to do with it. I'd like to think I got it right. My grandmother's sapphire ring is cold in the mornings. I notice it every time I reach for my coffee mug. That small weight on my right hand, that thin band of gold. Some days it feels like jewelry. Other days it feels like a message she's still sending. I've spent a lot of time thinking about what made Gerald so certain he would get away with it, and I think the answer is that he had for a very long time gotten away with everything. He had learned that confidence was its own kind of armor. That if you move through the world like someone who belongs, people stop checking your credentials. He filled the space my father left, and he smiled and he handled the paperwork, and nobody looked too closely because looking closely is uncomfortable, and he had made himself necessary. That kind of person doesn't expect to be stopped. He expects to be thanked. What he didn't expect was Graham. She never raised her voice at him. She never confronted him directly, as far as I know. What she did was quieter and more permanent. She wrote things down. She made copies. She found an attorney she trusted and she handed everything over, and she went back to making Thanksgiving dinner and watching her programs and waiting. She had the integrity to refuse to let a wrong go uncorrected, even when correcting it was slow and uncertain and required her to carry the knowledge alone for years. That's not a small thing. That is one of the harder things a person can do, to know what's right and pursue it without fanfare, without the validation of anyone watching. I learned something from her about what it actually means to be smart. Not just capable, not just educated, genuinely clear-eyed. She understood that the truth doesn't need to be loud to be true. It just needs to be documented. The paper trail she built was more powerful than any argument she could have made at a dinner table. She thought 3 steps ahead while Gerald was still congratulating himself on step 1. That kind of thinking is a discipline. It's something you practice. You learn to slow down when you're angry, to act when you're clear, to build the case before you walk into the room. And then there's what it took to walk into that room at all. I was afraid. I want to say that plainly because I think sometimes these stories get told as if the person at the center of them was fearless, and that wasn't true for me. I drove to that hotel in Columbus in a dress I changed into in a hospital bathroom, and I held a bottle of water with both hands because I was shaking slightly, and I thought about turning around approximately 4 times between the parking garage and the entrance. What kept me moving forward was not bravado. It was the decision, made months earlier in a parking garage reading pale blue stationery, that I was not going to let this be the version of events that stood. Fear doesn't have to be absent for you to act. It just has to be smaller than the thing you're doing it for. Graham didn't need me to be fearless. She needed me to show up. Gerald got away with it for years because no one looked. My mother didn't look because she was afraid of what she'd find. I didn't look because I didn't know there was something to find. The lesson I take from all of it is not that people are terrible. Most people are not Gerald. The lesson is that love without attention is incomplete. That caring about someone means being willing to look clearly at the circumstances around them, even when clarity is inconvenient. Even when what you find changes things. The ring fits perfectly. I don't think that's an accident. I think she knew exactly what she was doing, all the way to the end.